European nations must choose. From Scandinavia through the Baltics to the Balkans, from the Latin Mediterranean shorelines through Germania, Frankia, and all the way to Britania, are we going to stand up for that which our forefathers have sacrificed for? National integrity, economic prosperity, religious freedom, fundamental principles of morality, norms and values, all of which have made Europe what it ultimately evolved into. All of these are under real threat, and unless we stand up, Europe may fall prey to the proactive adventurism of malign adversaries. Good evening, I'm Jonathan Hessen, and this is the 24th edition of TV7 Europa Stands. Joining us to dissect Europe's state of internal and foreign affairs are Professor Miro Kovac, formerly a Minister of Foreign Affairs of Croatia, Professor Rosenthal, formerly a Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, Professor Jacek Czaputowicz, formerly a Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland, and retired Captain Atte Kaleva, Member of Parliament of Finland's ruling National Coalition Party, as well as a member of the Parliamentary Foreign Affairs as well as the Defense Committees. It's a pleasure to have you all here. And I'd like to start with you, Professor Kovac. When we're looking at the broad scheme of things from a European perspective, what is the key issue that we should focus on for this upcoming discussion?
There are several ways to look at things. We could say, for instance, that our European way of life is great. People like Europe, like our sceneries, our landscapes, our museums, our culture, our history. That's true. But strategically speaking, we are decadent. Europe is decadent, and we need a revival. Together with the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and other states, Israel, we form the political West. But we are not really acting as being responsible for the European continent. So what we need someone to push us to understand that we have to act as security providers on the continent, which is logical. And I hope that that would be the case if Mr. Trump is elected. Because if he pushes us to do more for security, to take care of the European continent, it would be the right approach for us, because I have the feeling that otherwise we will not act on our own. We need someone to push us. If we keep behaving as immature people, strategically speaking, we will be on the wrong track. And I want us to be on the right track. We need a European revival, with Europeans taking care of the European continent, and together with the US of the political West.
Of course, we need to wait just 2 days ahead of the US election. We'll find out what the American people have decided, hopefully, in the next 2 to 3 days. Professor Rosenthal?
Well, let me say that when we talk about Europe, it's more than, of course, the EU. That's one point. Secondly, if we talk about European leadership and getting your act together in Europe, I can't avoid taking a somewhat pessimistic note on the situation in Europe itself. And I'm talking there about developments which take place without any limits. We see I have sometimes the impression that in Europe we are still sticking on in certain parts of Europe, Western Europe, to the way in which we started, and that we, for instance, are not completely understanding the enormous changes which take place in Europe itself, especially with the surge of the Central and Eastern European countries. And there we go. Let me also say we are not that far from. We have had the elections for the European Parliament. We have now a new European Commission, and there, again, is unfortunately a somewhat pessimistic, nearly side remark. When I look at the European Commission, and I see, for instance, the leader of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, it looks to me, it resembles a little bit to me a sort of European kind of Angela Merkel, looking for compromises, politicking, getting a commission which has a lot of internal tensions, what's not well understood or what people are not well aware of is that, for instance, the financial and economic heavy portfolios are in the hands of the southern European countries, which means that the northern countries, who are a little bit thrifty, they look at it and they are very concerned. So I would love to see European leadership and the Europeans getting their act together. My way out is transatlantic alliance, transatlantic cooperation, and there, of course, the coming elections in the United States are of the utmost importance.
Absolutely. Professor Čeputović?
I agree that we are in an important moment in the European Union. There is a change of leadership. It will be a continuation to a certain extent because the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, remains at that position, but new commissioners gives us a chance for new opening and face new challenges. So I think that the 1st of December we should have accepted Commission by the European Parliament by that time, and next year will be important for Poland, my country, because we'll take over presidency of the European Union from Hungary. Hungary organizes meeting this half a year. They are not very successful due to the fact that they are not accepted. Their policies, pro-Russian, is not accepted in the European Union. Therefore, states send sometimes deputies or civil servants instead of political ministers for the meetings of the Council. And it is also a transitional period due to the fact that there is a change of the Commission. But Poland wants to start maybe to give new energy, to organize meetings, to maybe introduce again next round of sanctions against Russia, which is now stopped by Hungary and Germany. To support Ukraine, we hope to open negotiations, some first chapters to give the Ukrainians hope that they will join the European Union. And we have to also concentrate on the security of the European Union to protect our eastern border, and we'll have the same challenges, I mean, a European Union as now. Of course, a lot depends on the result of the election in the United States, but I have an impression that generally European Union loses its importance and geopolitical power in the world. There are some tensions in main countries. When you look at Germany, there are opinion polls showing that government has not much support of Chancellor Scholz. The same in France. So it demonstrates also a weakness that could be a problem to find a common position. And also countries become more and more, so to say, looking at their positions and not at the European Union as a whole. To give you an example, for example, Germany introduced border control between Poland and Germany within the European Union, which weakens Schengen area. It demonstrates that there is a turn in public opinion about who should deal with these challenges, either the European Union as such or national governments. It might lead to kind of a maybe weaker union in the future and more responsibility to governments.
Mr. Kaleva?
Thank you for having me, Jonathan. I agree with what has been said here on the table. I think Europe has been naive in so many ways. We have been naive in our ways of dealing with Russia. We have been, I agree with what Mr. President Trump said on his previous term. We don't know if he will be elected, we'll see in 2-3 days. But what he said was that Europe is lending security from the Americans without paying anything in response. And he was completely right, because so many European nations have been naive. Putin was saying in 2007 in Munich, basically what he considers the mission of his Russia to be, sort of the Soviet Union volume 2.0, that these kind of imperialistic attitudes enlarging sphere of influence. This was all stated, but we failed to realize that he was actually meaning what he said because of the low prices on gas, oil, resources. It was so economically lucrative to cut down on the military spending and get these cheap resources from Russia that Europe was this sense of naivety has now, like our former president, Mr. Niinistö, said, that now the masks have fallen off and only the cold face of the war is visible. So now we see the cold face of the war, but we have not been prepared. Fortunately, Poland has been prepared, 3.9% of GDP. Finland has been prepared. We never cut down on our military expenses because we have the sense of urgency. But if you look at nations more to the west, like Portugal, Spain, for example, Russia is not an existential threat to them. But Russia is very much an or the Netherlands, to say. But Russia is an existential threat to both Finland and Poland. So the eyes have been opened, but now we are lacking behind and we need to catch up. So maybe the NATO threshold of 2%, that will not be enough. We will see a rise up in the maybe 2.5, maybe, I don't know. I cannot say a figure, but it's there needs to be more. We need to do more, and we also, and this is something that I give great credit to Mr. Trump or President Trump before, that he was the one who was pushing us. He was the one who made us realize that we are actually free riders in the train.
Indeed. Well, I can tell you from a first-hand conversation with people on the Trump team that they are speaking about a 3% hike, which will, of course, bring about a new reality for Europe. Much of the weaponry that was given to Ukraine at the time was given by the Trump administration, at least the European team at the time within that administration, and has granted Ukraine the capacity to withstand the first waves of attack at the time. But let's focus first on the European portfolio, which Professor Rosenthal just mentioned. The portfolio of the economic file is heavily in the south. It's from my vivid memory, looking back to the economic crisis at the time that emerged in Greece, in Spain, and elsewhere. There was a lot of anger and resentment in the Netherlands, in Germany, and in Finland, for that matter, about the various misconduct, if I may say it diplomatically, about the manner in which the reporting was conducted. Are we going to see this deepen the friction within Europe, and to what degree?
When I mentioned Europe and being decadent in a certain way, I said because, look, what is our strategy? Do we have a realistic strategy? Speaking about the European Union. Let's take, for instance, energy policy. The whole Green Deal, is it realistic? It is not realistic. Now we see it. It is not realistic. We need a realistic approach. Can we get rid of fossil fuels easily? No. Still today, Germany is 76, 77% dependent upon fossil fuels, despite the Energiewende. So it'll take time. So energy policy, migration issues, how to deal with the migration. Whom will we let in? We will let in people whom we need, or we will let in people because we want to show compassion. So we have to adopt a different approach, because the battle is going to be very, very tough. Look at the US today. Niall Ferguson, he said it the other day. Today the US spends more on administering the public debt than on defense. Things are changing. So our competitors in the world, meaning, for instance, the BRICS countries, China, Russia, India, they are watching us. If they see that we're weak, they will continue to push, and they will then try to take over. So we have to understand that the battle is going to be very, very tough for the resources in the world, and we have to be competitive. So practically, okay, in Croatia, we have a growth of more than 2%, which is good. But if you look at the biggest economies in the European Union, Germany, France, the Netherlands, practically no growth. So we need a new strategy, and it also applies to Ukraine. What is the strategy? Besides saying you have to continue to fight, what is the strategy? We need strategies. We need realistic strategies and not irreal strategies worked out in some laboratories by people who do not know what real life is.
Let's keep it focused on the economic side. Professor
The
Rosenthal.
economic sets, well, I've been for a long time, I was in science, technology and innovation. And there we had the one-liner, the United States innovates, China in those days imitates, Europe regulates. There you go. When we're talking about the driving forces for the economy of the future, it's all about innovation. And there we are, yeah, well, some say we are lagging behind. Others say we are actually up front with our so-called Digital Services Acts, etc., where we regulate. But it shows that there is something suffocating in this, on this continent. There's no driving force. Yeah. There's no, in a way, it is lacking energy. And then what our Polish colleague said just before, when we look at this trend towards renewed nationalism throughout Europe, there is energy, whether you like it or not, within these countries. But when you go to Brussels, it is drifting away. And so, sorry, in that respect, I'm loving the idea of being united, being a force in the world scene. But right now, as some say, when we take the US on the one hand, China on the other hand, the superpowers for the future, then Europe is being sandwiched. And we have to get out of that kind of situation.
Well, you many times, Professor Rosenthal, spoke about the fact that the European Union was initially established, of course, in order to avoid endless wars in Europe.
Absolutely.
And the key factor thereof was, on the one hand, the relationship between Germany and France, which is pivotal for Europe to avoid those endless wars, and on the other hand, to utilize that security foundation that is established in Europe to then once again drive more economic prosperity and develop the continent into a new level. Unfortunately, it seems that as, again, I'm going back to the European Commission, the composition of the European Commission that ultimately calls the shots when we're talking about the regulatory aspects of how Europe is supposed to look like is pushing once again to divisions within Europe. Is that not threatening European cohesive capacity to maintain a certain equilibrium that once again would allow it to flourish?
Generally, European Commission is responsible for economic affairs, but I think that the main say will have still countries. And I see some problems. There is a threat that and there are expectations, there are some predictions that in Germany, for example, it will be a recession. And it's very objective factor because German economy was based on cheap energy from Russia, from gas from Russia. Therefore, it was competitive. Without that, it's very difficult for them. You can read that main companies like us and others invest rather abroad because it's too expensive to produce fertilizers in Germany, for example. So it will be a difficult time for Germany, which affects very strongly Poland and other countries because we are suppliers for production in Germany. But it is also maybe a chance geopolitically to become not dependent on Russia. It's very important to maintain that situation. As far as the organization of economic sector is concerned, we are very much in favor of less regulations. It will be our priority. For example, not Green Deal, but energy security, for example, which we should concentrate to give chances to economy, companies in Europe to be more competitive on the market. And less ideology, more market, it would be the answer. So we'll see how it will develop. But first, difficult situation. We are not competitive to other countries, other regions, as Europe, whole Europe is concerned. But maybe after that crisis, we will become a leader if we become not dependent from Russia in that case.
Mr. Kovac?
Thank you. I would say that it's the Green Deal is not functioning, not despite of the Energiewende, but because of the Energiewende. Because if you're a country size of Germany, and you all of a sudden you shut down the fully functioning nuclear power plants, then what's going to happen? Everybody knows what's going to happen. You cannot build this kind of windmills. And what happens when the wind doesn't blow? Over here, up in the north in Finland, I mean, it gets pretty cold. So what do we do next? So I mean, that was also a sign of the naivety that it's plaguing Europe as a whole. If we think about the regulatory power, it can also be used for good. But unfortunately, we're not very good at. Maybe this is decadence. Now, European Union is more interested in regulating, for example, the caps on the plastic bottles. But as far as I'm concerned, we still have our no bailouts rule in place. But we're letting member states violate our own agreements and our own charters. So then, I mean, what are these charters for if nobody follows them? I would say, yeah, you know, it looks good on paper. No bailout, every country is responsible for maintaining a sound, healthy budget, economic budget. But then when somebody doesn't, they say, okay, who cares? We'll just pump in some more money. And the countries that have been quite good at maintaining the budget, they will be the ones to pay. So this will create divisions within Europe, definitely. So we should be, Europe should come together, forget the decadence, forget the naivety, and start to follow our own agreements, our own charters. Then we can be a force for good. Then we can be independent, at least to a certain extent. And then we can be a force against the US and China and the BRICS countries.
Indeed. Well, let's move to another element here of Europe is very much reliant on freedom of navigation in the high seas. One of the key challenges right now is the fact that Europe is faced with a challenge in the strategic strait of Bab el-Mandeb, which the Iranian proxy Ansar Allah, dominated by the Houthi tribe in Yemen, is effectively blocking that strategic strait with the adjacent waterways, of course, impacted by that. We do have an EU mission operating there. To what degree it's successful, unfortunately, not very much so. But now we're also seeing additional adversary, be it Russia or China, increasing their influence also in Madagascar and other places around the Cape of Hope, which raises questions. What happens if also those waterways are now blocked? Will that not put Europe in a whole different position? What should be done in order to increase the security in the high seas, in collaboration, of course, with other European nations? Should it not be also part of a transatlantic effort or a push, since this is very much within the mandate that should have been within context of NATO potentially?
So of course that's once again a field which shows that we are compelled to work together, meaning Europe, European Union and the US, and countries close to the European Union being part of the West, like for instance the UK. But we have to be honest to ourselves. We have to ask ourselves the following question, meaning the US and Europe. Do we have the power to avoid such situations with the Houthis? Or do we have to negotiate with certain powers? If we have the power, okay, will we work together and depose ourselves? Or will we adopt a different approach? What do we see right now in Ukraine? We see that apparently our support does not suffice for the Ukrainians to stop the Russians. What do we see in the conflict between Israel and Hamas, Israel and Hezbollah, Israel and Iran? The Americans didn't want the Israelis to attack nuclear facilities and oil facilities of the Iranians. The Americans begged, asked Netanyahu not to do that. Why? Because they do not want to overstretch themselves. There must be a reason for that. Because Israel would have liked to use the opportunity to strike Iran very harshly. So the question is, do we have the necessary power to impose ourselves? If we dispose of that power, then we have to get together and have a master plan. And if we do not have the necessary power, we have to adopt a different approach. Then we have to be much more realistic in foreign policy and say, look, we will not change the regime in North Korea. We will not change it. They have their own system. We will try to find a common ground in some fields and work together if we can do it, and we will contain them. Okay? With Russia, we will not be able to overthrow the government in Russia. We will have that Russia over there, different system, different approach, different philosophy, but we will try to have to be there on peaceful terms. So this is a question that we have to ask ourselves, and then find the right answer for our future.
Professor Rosenthal, if I may expand also on the point that I asked Professor Kovac. We're looking at a scenario in which, as Professor Cheputovich also mentioned, Europe was heavily reliant on Russia when we're talking about energy, particularly Germany in that context. Europe then took away the eggs from the Russian basket and put most of those eggs in the Qatari basket. Now, that same energy that is coming from Qatar was disrupted for a short period of time because of Bab el-Mandab being blocked. Now that same energy is diverted through the Cape of Hope to the ports and the terminals that the Netherlands established in Groningen in order to divert it to Germany. Now, how can we in Europe expect the energy prices to be in a cost of living regulatory position if there is energy deficiency and there is no capacity to protect those shipping lanes?
Well, it's a pointed question, a pointed suggestion on your part, because, you know, I remember that when the war with Ukraine started, the first and primary reaction in the Netherlands and some other countries was that we would go for Qatar and the LNG from Qatar. Simple. And we in the Netherlands have, of course, this large petrochemical port of Rotterdam, which is one of the main targets for the Russians if they would ever decide to do something nasty. So that is the situation which we have to face. And it brings me actually, Jonathan, to also the remark by Professor Kovac about, for instance, the position of Europe vis-à-vis Israel. When you consider Europe to be a community of values, the thrust of Western civilization. By the way, not territory-wise only, because Japan, South Korea are also part of the story. And then you see what is happening when a country like Israel, which is the only democracy in the Middle East, is being attacked already long before 7th of October 2023. You know, the way in which Europe accepted was appeasing towards Iran's message that Israel should be annihilated. Where are we as a community of values? When we are right now, seeing that in Brussels the discussion is about loosening the association treaty with Israel. When we see that several countries in Europe are saying, well, let's get rid of them. You know, what are we talking about? That is my problem, my predicament. And I would love to see Europe really stand up and indeed look at it from its value base to all the theaters of conflict. It is Ukraine, Russia. It is Israel versus the terrorists. I am already for 2 years as a chairman of our Dutch Free Iran Committee. I'm fighting together with some others to get the terrorist gang of Iran being listed in Brussels. It doesn't come through. That is the reality we are facing.
With an EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, such as Josep Borrell, you will not push for something like that, because such a person does not look at EU or European interests to his heart, but he looks at what he regards as important from his own prism, and he notes that also. There is no unanimity on certain decisions. He says this is what it should have been. Unfortunately, there are some difficult actors, and this is something that he repeated time and again. Thankfully, it will be out of the picture very soon. But I'd like to go back to the European security and energy security. Professor Čaputović, what can be done?
Poland is also dependent on LNG from Qatar. Therefore, I think the freedom of navigation is very important. It is a discipline or subject on which international law was based. Simply, it became from the law of the sea, and we have to support freedom of navigation. But on the other hand, European Union is not very good in that we don't have enough forces. But countries like US or UK, which is not member of the European Union, they have tradition of being involved in trade and in transcontinental trade. But on the other hand, there is also something very important relating to our security, because Baltics, for which we are responsible as Europeans, became, so to say, almost internal sea of NATO after joining by Sweden and Finland. And there was a very important decision, I think, very recently, that the NATO base will be established in Rostock, Germany, which was agreed that it was a DDR part of the Germany, that NATO should not move to that area. Russia protests. So I think it is very important. We have to look around our neighborhood as the European Union. Another problem is, of course, Mediterranean and the Black Sea, where you have competition with Russia wanting to stop Ukraine from having their access to the sea and freedom of navigation there, with Turkey there. So it also demonstrates that we have to have alliances with other countries. I fully agree that the West, meaning the United States as a leading country, could resolve that issue and guarantee freedom of navigation, which is in our interests.
I do think that it's outrageous that so many European countries have placed so much leverage in the hands of Qatar when it comes to energy security in Europe. It just doesn't make sense, particularly not at a time when Belgium is still prosecuting an investigation into Qatargate, into a very robust criminal case.
But we started signing agreement with the Trump administration in U.S.
Right.
And Donald Trump, I think, he understands the situation, saying, drilling, baby. Drilling means that this is an important instrument of guaranteeing influence in the world.
Indeed. Mr. Kaleva?
This is a very, very nice discussion, and I really have to say I agree with what has been said. But I think that the two biggest destabilizing factors, or the two major destabilizing factors in the world, are, of course, Iran and Russia. China shares this worldview that the BRICS countries, not all of them, but this especially Russia and Iran, is saying that the West is somehow malign, ill-wishing to the other nations, and they like hostile. But China is not destabilizing. Now what we have seen is that North Korea is starting to play actively in the world stage, not only in the Korean Peninsula and in these surroundings. And this is a concern for China, but also for maritime freedom of movement, transportation, whatever. You need to get rid of the Iranian regime, and you need to contain Russia. This is not an easy task to do, But this I think it's very counterproductive. I mean, the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, so many of the destabilizing factors in the Middle East, they are all backed by Iran. If you cut down the Hydra's head, then the tentacles will collapse on their own. And Russia is, like you said, Jonathan, Russia is active in Africa, for example, destabilizing. So we need to focus on these two issues. And therefore, I think it's really, really ill-advised for the European Union to hamper down and also for the Americas, of course, to hamper down the Israeli capabilities and Israeli means of striking Iran. I'm also, we are in the process of forming a Free Iran friendship group in the Finnish parliament. I'm doing it at the moment. It's not easy because it has to come from within. You cannot really instigate a revolution from outside. But it's, this is, unless we cut down the influence of Iran and contain Russia, we cannot achieve any kind of stability in the world because they are doing their utmost best to destabilize.
It's a little strong that totalitarian regimes thinks that the free West is malign, to say the least. But of course, that's in their prism, not being able to act in their corrupt fashion.
This is the shared view of the Chinese as well.
Right.
But China is not actively destabilizing. China is trying to stabilize. And this is also with the I would say with the Sunni majority Arab countries. They are not so active in destabilizing the region, whereas Iran is actively destabilizing. So this is the difference that we have to consider.
I'm not sure about the Taiwan Strait right now in the South China Sea, and probably the Philippine Defense Ministry will not agree with you about the activities that the Chinese are undergoing right now in those areas. But nonetheless, let's broaden the scope. We do not have very much time left for everything that we want to discuss, and therefore we are looking at a situation where the European Union just recently, after the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen went to the Egyptian capital, Cairo, where she met with Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and pledged over 7.4 billion euros in order to ensure that this country does not collapse. There are various arrangements with Libya and Algeria and other North African countries. Is Europe going to pay for all those countries to try and convince them that they will not allow migration or illegal migration to enter into Europe and then still get frustrated about the fact that it happens anyway?
I'm coming back to the point I've made. So we need realistic policies. We need a realistic approach, and our approach is in Europe, basically I would be so courageous and say it, basically in the old Europe, as Rosenthal would say, we are in some kind of post-national thinking, okay? Although the US, Russia, China are not in a post-national thinking, okay? So we have to get realistic again. That's my appeal to the major policymakers in the old Western Europe, okay? So we have to understand how the world works, how the world functions. When it comes to China, China is the only power which can really threaten the US. But the US knows that Russia is trying to destabilize things. Russia cannot change the rules. But Russia and China together, and Iran with them, and India on that side, there is a problem. So when we spoke about energy policy, today Europe buys more LNG, liquefied gas, from Russia than from the US. So there is a dependence. So in the long run, I would say the following thing is some kind of heretic view. What Russia is doing in Ukraine, not acceptable. We have to combat that, of course. Ukraine will be free. We will see what it will look like. But it's going to feel like Finland became free in the long run. But, and now being part of the West, in the opinion, and the NATO. But we have to, in the long run, I think, Jonathan, what we should long for is to extract, it may sound futuristic, we have to extract Russia from the BRICS bloc, okay? So the idea of Surkov, who was an advisor to Putin, deputy chief of the administration in the Kremlin, he wrote a year ago an article which was transmitted by Bloomberg, and he was not arrested for that, although it's an opposite view to the actual view, the official view. So if there's a global south, and there is a global south, we need a global north. Russia should be a part of the global north. And if you want to confront in the long run China, we need Russia not as being a partner like Ukraine, but not being hostile to us.
Yeah, but Professor Kovac, the Bush administration in the early 2000s was very active in trying to accomplish this aspiration. It failed miserably with President Vladimir Putin at the time.
I'm just trying to be rational because so look, right now in Ukraine, the US does not want to radicalize things. Because if it wanted, then it would give the permission to the Ukrainians to hit Russian targets in Russia. It doesn't do that. Why? There must be a reason for that. So if the idea is that we cannot weaken significantly Russia, what will we do then? Is it better to have them close to us, or is it better to have them with the Chinese, the Iranians, and the Indians? I think it's better to have them close to us, but not allowing them to conquer Ukraine, of course.
Professor Rosenthal, the Netherlands has, of course, requested to alter its migration policy. It is subject, of course, under Article 91 of its constitution to adhere to international treaties. Nonetheless, within that context, it does look at the European Union and realize that it is frustrating the future of the Dutch civilization in particular and Western civilization at large.
Definitely, that's true. And it doesn't apply only to the Netherlands. When we see the situation in France, outside of the EU by now, the UK, Scandinavia, Sweden, Denmark, we are all in the same boat. And it is true, optimistic note, that there is some kind of movement in the EU towards getting your act together.
Is it not too late?
It may very well be too late, but then you are breaking open actually the whole discussion about what is going on right now in Western Europe and in Northern Europe. When I look at the way in which the scenes of the streets in the main capitals of Western Europe, London, Paris, Amsterdam, Berlin, are dominated by flags of Hamas, etc. The story is told.
Thank God it happened, though, because I'm actually happy it happened, because that's the reason Europe is waking up.
That's very well, that's very probable, but at the same time, you see that within the several national governments, there is a hesitation to act. Right. And there you could even say, paradoxically, that perhaps it should come from Brussels, you know, to do something about it. In the several capitals, I don't see the courage which belongs to a value
That's right word, courage.
I don't see the courage. I can say to you open here that I said to the Dutch government that they were lacking simply courage to do something about it. When we look at the universities in Western Europe, how they are by now overwhelmed by non-democratic, aggressive, offensive forces, which are, by the way, financed to a large part by already mentioned Iran. When we see the interference of Russia in that respect, the story is told.
And not just Iran, not Russia, but also Qatar, Turkey, Morocco, Algeria. Many countries are taking part and supporting their own respective mosque or other forum. Professor Cevultovic, you already mentioned earlier the fact that Germany has already blocked the border.
That's right.
And that is one of the reasons.
I agree. I think I see the change of the attitude in societies. They express that change in the election results, and the governments must react, and this is one of an example. And Poland's proposal was quite well received. I think it's a new thinking, because you can stop this migration by force. For example, we have a fence on our border, try to not allow them to enter Poland and then go farther. And we have to invest in that. It's a physical barrier. These people who are coming from Belarus to Poland, they are from Afghanistan, from Syria, from Iraq, from Ethiopia, used as a hybrid, so to say, weapon by Vladimir Putin and Lukashenko. So we have to understand that. And it's more and more people understand that. But our proposal was just to suspend possibility to apply for asylum. You have to, I think, to fight with this illegal migration, cut benefits they receive after coming here. The hope is that if people around the world learn that if they come here they don't have anything, they cannot apply for that, they will be transferred back, the pressure will be weaker. There is this kind of feeling, this is a rationale of that proposal. And I think that we see what will be the further discussion within the European Union, and maybe it will be a new direction. Yeah.
Mr. Kaleva, obviously you're part of the National Coalition Party, the ruling party, so to speak, alongside one of the key parties that form your coalition is the True Finns. Both of you are conservative, right of center, very clear on migration policy, and yet I look around here in Finland and I do see Islamists and jihadists roaming the streets of Finland, unfortunately even here in Helsinki. Why isn't the government here doing enough?
Unfortunately, you're absolutely right, Jonathan. Let me first counter with what Professor Kovac was saying about the global north, including Russia. This was tried in the 1990s when we tried to encapsulate Russia and get it along with the family. And myself included, we thought that this would be, as soon as the Russians got a taste of liberties and freedoms and rule of law, democracy, that they would somehow, when you scratch the Russian like this, and there would be this Western type emerging. It doesn't emerge. They do not want the same things as we. It didn't work out. It ended up in a 10 years of chaos for the Russians. So I see it as very unlikely, unfortunately. Appeasement doesn't work. We need more Churchills, less Chamberlains, with regards to dictators like Putin or the Iranian regime, for example. But Jonathan, you were absolutely right that we have been naive here in Finland too. And Europe has been naive as a whole. Like I said, we have paid the dictators like Erdogan for not letting the people through, so that we can have this holier-than-thou attitude that, okay, we have the asylum seekers and they are in need, so we will help all of them. But we cannot be the social office of the whole world. We just don't have enough resources. And the asylum-seeking process has been misused as a way of migration, not only for the people who are in fear of some kind of oppression or torture or even death. So this needs to change. Schengen area only functions when you have the outer borders sealed. Then you can have freedom of movement inside. And now what we are seeing is my party was leading the legislation just last summer on closing the border completely with Russia. Now the border has been closed, but now we have a legislation in place where we can stop receiving asylum seekers altogether, temporarily. This has to be, I mean, you cannot just say it like this. This is not active at the moment, the legislation. But we can activate once we see that Russia is using them as a hybrid warfare. You have a lot of people, Islamists. You have these people in the academia. You have people who have totally different views of what is right, what is wrong, what is desirable, what is not desirable than the majority of the population. And you see it all around in Europe. And now the eyes have opened, and we need to sort of stand up for Europe, for Finland, for Poland, for the Netherlands, for Croatia, and say that we will not tolerate, we will not accept this anymore. We will not let our countries be used and taken over by very hostile foreign forces, namely the Islamists.
And let me be clear, and this is something that I think needs to be expressly said. I have no issue with Christian migrants coming from anywhere around the world, or Jewish migrants, or
they will adapt. They will
those
integrate.
who seek to integrate and to be part of society. It helps because there is a true issue with the number of children and the family construct in Europe that also needs to be dealt with. Unfortunately, it's not dealt with enough.
Jonathan, let me just add one more thing. We need a European Union-wide solution to the migration, the asylum-seeking crisis. If we don't see a European Union-wide solution, then we will have national solutions like we have now in Finland, like you have in Poland, and this will create further divisions within European Union. So this is not desirable, but we will do it because it's a question of survival. It's a question of our existence, our culture is at stake.
Indeed. Well, within my point, back in the 90s, mid-90s, the then mayor of Istanbul, today President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, quoted a poem that declared that every mosque is a barracks from which the Islamist will emerge and conquer the entire world. He was placed in prison. Ironically, 3 years later, he became president of that same country as the leader of the AKP. But we will put that aside. We're drawing near to the end of the program, and we have roughly 1 minute for each of you to give some optimism into this very bleak discussion today. Professor Kovac, we'll start with you.
I am an optimist because I think that it is quite late, but not too late to act. And when speaking about realism, I am also inspired by the late Henry Kissinger. Also, when it comes to Russia, so they're different. Okay, they are competitor, but they shouldn't be too far away from us. Okay, because if we have a bloc which is too strong with China, Russia, India, Iran, and so on and so forth, it's going to be a problem for the West in the long run. I'm convinced. The middle class has to be strong in our country. If there's no strong middle class, we don't have any democracy. Okay, so we need harmony in our societies. Okay, and we have to work together in the political West between Europe and the US. We need a new deal after these elections next week on Tuesday. I hope there's going to be a result and a winner who will push us to get out of the comfort zone and to strike a new deal for the political West to know, and that we know what we do in that political West. We take over Europe with the Americans, and the Americans take over when it comes to China.
Professor Rosenthal?
Henry Kissinger was mentioned. Henry Kissinger made his way with his notion of two reasons for actions. One was choice, the other was necessity. And we are talking necessity here. We are talking a wake-up call, which is needed in Europe. And when it doesn't come from the inside, it will come from the outside.
That's it.
And that is my optimistic note at this moment.
As a Ridder van Oranje, obviously you could always say je m'en tiendrai for
Absolutely.
we will prevail. Professor?
Yes, realism in the theories of international relations mean that something is based on interest. I agree that we should have realistic in that sense policy, not based on values or ideology in that sense. And I think that there is a room to have common interest with the future administration in the United States, whoever wins. The problem is to have a decision made by American people. And we are in an important moment in Europe where there is a change of the leadership, new commission. So maybe it will be good time to strengthen transatlantic relations and to challenge the threat from Russia and other countries like China.
I'm also an optimist like the gentleman here. We were naive. We had our eyes closed with regards to Russia, with regards to the migration. It's, like you said, Jonathan, from Muslim majority countries. We have no problems with the Christians, with Jews migrating because they will integrate. But these two issues that it was sort of forbidden to say anything about. You were labeled as a racist, as a fascist, as a Nazi. If you said anything that was sort of against the kumbaya feeling that that generally was prevailing in the center-west political sphere. But now it's our eyes have opened in Europe. Russia's full-scale attack on Ukraine was an eye-opener with regards to Russia. And now the migration crisis, the asylum seeker crisis, it was an eye-opener regarding the free, open borders, immigration. So we went quite low, but we didn't have to go too low. We can now go from there, and we are doing the necessary actions. We are taking the necessary actions that we need to take, and this is something that I see all over Europe. So it used to be more bleak. Now it's not nice. The future is not all rosy, but it's still, at least the eyes have opened. We are seeing clearly the realistic views now.
Indeed. Well, I would like to actually also take this opportunity to relay our sympathies to the Spanish people. They are undergoing some tough challenges today, these days, in Valencia and other places throughout Spain. And of course, we send our sympathies and support. Europe should stand together in times of catastrophe to be able to support one another to do just that. But I'd like to take this also, we have come to the end of our discussion today. Professor Kovac, Professor Uri Rosenthal, Professor Jacek Čaputović, and Mr. Ate Kaleva for all of your insights. And I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Helsinki, Finland, wishing you a good evening. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.